Why effective altruists and everyone else should become nihilists. Reclaiming moral nihilism. Now this is a recorded version of an essay I published on Substack a while ago, perhaps 10 days or so, and I wanted to make an audio version available of this for my YouTube channel primarily. Now I have no doubt that this may be my most controversial post yet, if not ever, for I will try to convince you to become a moral nihilist. Not just because it is the best meta-ethical position, but I will argue that morality itself is bad, and we could have a better, more altruistic world without it. Now, to claim that morality is bad will immediately strike some as an oxymoron. You might imagine someone saying, if there are no moral facts, then how can morality be good or bad? Gotcha. Now please bear with me for a moment before you decide that this view is obviously absurd and incoherent. If you still end up disagreeing, you can make use of the comment section to explain your disagreement. Now, since I have published many articles in ethics, share close affinities with the goals of effective altruism as a self-avowed utilitarian, and spend much of my time advocating for the better treatment of other animals, people are often surprised to learn that I consider myself a moral nihilist and do not believe in moral facts. On the faces of many interlocutors, I can see puzzlement. These views seem strikingly inconsistent, and a philosopher should not hold such obviously inconsistent beliefs. Sometimes I receive the odd hostile squint or angry comment online, suggesting that it is perhaps dishonest to engage in ethical argumentation while thinking that there are no objective moral truths. Yet this attitude turns out to be remarkably widespread. Many philosophers will have experienced it in their classrooms. Students cling to nihilistic stances while also seemingly holding strong moral convictions about how a society should be organized. It is tempting to dismiss this as a common mistake among first-year undergrads. But moral anti-realism is a widely shared view even among effective altruists who have spent more time than most thinking about how they can do good in the world and what that means. In a survey on the Effective Altruism Forum initiated by Bentham's Bulldog, members were asked to place themselves on a continuum in response to the question, is morality objective, yes or no? The result of 312 votes was heavily skewed towards anti-realism, which may surprise some readers. Yet, despite this result, the survey was likely biased towards moral realism because the survey opened with a long argumentative essay by Bentham's Bulldog against moral anti-realism, concluding with this statement, and here I quote, "Moral anti-realism is certainly an internally consistent position, but it's a very implausible one. It gives up many of the most obvious truths about the world, the stance-independent wrongness of torture on the basis of super lame arguments. Absent some extremely compelling reason to accept it, we should remain convinced that it's false. Some things really are wrong." Now, clearly I don't agree with this. And given how easy it is to push my students to vote for one view over another in virtue of how I frame the question and options, I was actually surprised by how many ended up voting for an anti-realist view about ethics. The forum included 220 comments with arguments for and against moral anti-realism, for instance by Richard Chappell, who I've previously featured on my podcast and defended moral realism. It's indeed ironic that despite close agreement on first-order issues, effective altruists are so split on meta-ethics. One might have expected the altruistic sacrifices of effective altruists to have been motivated by a conviction in moral facts, yet many appear to be nihilists. Now I will note that few moral anti-realists will adopt the label moral nihilist, which is historically associated with a kind of destructiveness and lack of concern for others, not unaided by the ironically also German nihilists in the Big Lebowski. But I am using the term in a neutral sense that allows any moral nihilist to also be among the most altruistic people on this planet. All it requires is a denial of moral facts. The prominent effective altruist and Harvard psychologist Joshua Green has even written a book for why this kind of nihilism supports a first-order embrace of utilitarianism. See also this interview of him on a Lives Were Lived podcast by Kasia de Lazari, Radek and Peter Singer, where they have pressed him on his views. So, like Green, I think utilitarianism of all moral theories is the least like the castles in the sky that moral philosophers have built. Even if there are no moral facts, pleasures and pains still exist as do preferences. Things can still be better or worse for a human or other animal from their own point of view, irrespective of whether morality exists. And we can, of course, care about these interests. So effective altruists aiming to do more good with their time, money and resources, a quote here that's very common, need not be committed to morality at all if it just means to promote the interests of people. The idea that things can't be good for someone from their own point of view unless moral realism is correct is a common error committed by philosophers. When I speak of moral nihilism enabling a better world, I don't imply any objective evaluation of the world in moral terms, just that individually we would be better off and should prefer it on pure prudential grounds. It's in our self-interest. Indeed, it is arguably moral nihilism that has motivated a large proportion of effective altruists to join the movement. Morality can be a source of complacency even, creating a wide gap between permissible and impermissible actions. As long as you do not violate anyone's rights or cause them harm, most people think you're free to do whatever you want. At worst, morality doesn't just make us blind to the suffering of others, but it may even encourage it. Yet, if it is up to us to change the world as we see fit, one may become far more altruistically motivated to shape it in ways we would like to see. Even Peter Singer himself started out as a moral anti-realist. Of course, I'm not denying that an embrace of nihilism may promote selfishness in some individuals, but it is a mistake to think that there's a necessary link here. If you have an altruistic, pro-social psychology, none of that will change if you become a nihilist. Indeed, I'm willing to make a prediction that psychological studies would show nihilists to have greater altruistic tendencies than the rest of the population, which would also support the survey results among effective altruists. On that note, I did a podcast probably by now a year ago with the EA-aligned experimental psychologist Matty Wilkes, who has also worked with fellow Substacker Paul Bloom as well as Lucy Scaviola on the psychology behind effective altruism and their pro-social tendencies like compassion for animals that I can only recommend. So take a look at that. So the fear that an adoption of moral nihilism would lead to the end of civilization, however, is simply a mistake. Just like Christians were mistaken to think that atheists could not act altruistically, we make the same mistake with nihilists, prematurely dismissing the view out of fear of its consequences. And if we can make a case for morality by appealing to its positive consequences, then the door is also open to do the reverse. If things can be better or worse for individuals independently from morality, then we are free to ask whether morality itself is harmful. Indeed, counterintuitively, morality itself might be to blame for many of the greatest evils. One of the most obvious cases here is our treatment of other animals. Many of my readers, like myself, greatly care about animal suffering, yet as I've argued in an interview for the Sentientism podcast by Jamie Woodhouse, morality has historically been used to justify causing harm to them. Moral arguments often obscure the reality of suffering on the ground. They are frequently detached from morality and can do more harm than good. It is all too easy to cherry-pick the cases where moral arguments had a positive effect to conclude that morality itself must be a net positive. It's easy to think that our own values reflect some objective way the world should be. And such confidence is not conducive to creating a well-functioning society full of members with radically different interests. A while ago, I wrote up a long case for moral nihilism in a journal article. Link below. I was trying to convince people to take moral nihilism seriously as a real view rather than mere strawman. In The Big Lebowski, a character expresses the view that nihilists are even worse than Nazis. Nihilists? Fuck me. I mean, say what you will about the tenets of National Socialism, dude. At least it's an ethos. It's an interesting quote because, of course, the opposite is true. An ethos does not have intrinsic value. An ethos can do more harm than good, as the case of Nazism clearly demonstrates. Perhaps a better world is in reach once we abandon moral language and thinking. But to make this point, we first have to reclaim the term nihilism, not unlike to how the terms queer or gay started out as pejoratives. Because I wanted to reach the public, I wrote my article in a deliberately accessible style, but of course no philosophers read articles from philosophy journals, so I've copied a version of it into Substack. I'll put a link in the notes of the episode below, so you can check that out if you want to read the whole article. But yeah, otherwise, I hope this made you think a bit about moral nihilism, and if you want to read more about it, check out the paper I wrote. Enjoy your week.